Welcome to the Get Hired podcast with Nicky Bulmer and Misty Combs. Every episode is an opportunity to learn better resume and interviewing skills with these HR experts as they review the resume of a job searcher and conduct a practice interview with them. They give real feedback that everyone can learn from. This is a post-status production in partnership with Liquid Web, sponsored by OmniSend.
All right, so we are recording. We are doing our first Get Hired podcast. So thank you for Corey Mast for being with us today. I appreciate you being our guinea pig, so to speak.
Happy to do it.
Awesome, thank you. Your career path from what you submitted to us is a WordPress developer. So um, we put together some interview questions that we might ask if I were interviewing one of our WordPress developers. Is there anything else that you want us to know before we go ahead and just dive right into everything? Do you want to talk about, anything else besides WordPress development that you'd like us to touch on, or?
No, I think it's fine. I mean, given treating all of this as an example, I think that's fine, right? It would come down to if you were, because I've been a CTO, I'm also an amateur bartender, um, and so it would just come down to, what position you were actually hiring for. So I think if we treat this as an example of hiring Corey as a WordPress developer, which is the most likely scenario for me, then that's a great place to start.
Awesome. So I'm Nikki. I'm the hiring coordinator at Liquid Web. I do all the actual hiring, and Misty's my boss, so she doesn't do any of the hiring, but she yells at me when I mess it up.
Which
Uh,
could be partially true, but I'm Misty Combs, the director of HR for Liquid Web, and in my career, probably the first 20 years, I did a lot of recruiting, but I'm thankful to have Nikki handle that now.
That's awesome.
so I'll just go ahead and dive right in. We'll do the interview first, and then I'll go and give you some resume feedback and portfolio feedback just at a real high level at the end. So tell us about you. Tell us about your experience and why you think you'd be a great WordPress developer.
Sure. I started building for the web back in the 90s. I don't like to count those years so much, but I think there's just about 3 decades there of experience now. And started like most web developers, cutting up designs in Photoshop, and then taught myself JavaScript, and then back in the day, ASP Classic. Um, just as it was going out of fashion, and then eventually jumped on the PHP train because that seemed to be picking up steam, and obviously very glad I did. And then around 2010, 2011, started getting hired for WordPress development because it started to become one of the more popular frameworks for front end development, or not front end, front end facing websites. Um, and in the early 2000s, I also caught the web app SaaS so-called bug, and started my own entrepreneurial journey there. And yeah, so was building SaaS apps for many years, and then from about 2010 on, almost all of my day job experience was WordPress, just because again it became more and more popular. And then um, somewhere in the middle there, I switched from building apps outside of WordPress to building SaaS apps using WordPress, and then also building plugins inside WordPress. So yeah, WordPress for the last 5-10 years has really been most of my universe experience. Like, I'm both involved with the community and selling products inside the WordPress world. And then also I still have ongoing clients where I maintain pretty large WordPress websites, and both front end and back end. So lots and lots of WordPress focused experience. And me being me, I tend to go deep on things, and so WordPress has become a point of passion and focus where I've again been very involved in the community and tried to help out with running events and stuff like that. So I've also got access to a pretty good network. So when there's occasionally something I can't figure out, I've got an extensive network of people that I can reach out to get help.
Yeah, the WordPress community is one of the biggest and deepest communities that I've seen since I started working in tech. Like it's definitely I would say that it's probably at least as good as the Linux community.
Hmm.
You can dive into a forum or on Reddit or whatever and get help and almost instantly for anything that you need. I always joke with people that if you want the right answer, post the wrong answer and somebody will correct you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. But it's
Uh,
friendly. Like I find I previously having been involved with other communities, music related and then tech related. One of the big differences that I think that drew me to WordPress is that people you don't get nearly as much of the know-it-all, the condescending, so-called neckbeard kind of behavior, and it's a very welcoming community, which I value immensely.
yeah. I always joke as a Linux nerd that I'm the basement dwelling neckbeard and I'm actually in my basement, so it works. Took care of the beard today though. Um, so how do you handle like feedback and revisions that you receive from non-technical people that you're working with or collaborating with non-technical team members?
Yeah, that took a lot of practice. Starting as a deep nerd in my 20s, I definitely went through the know-it-all phase, the you're not technical, so you don't know as much as I do phase and whatnot. Um, and then one of my early success is a loaded word, but one of my more successful web apps that I built around 2010 was a little app called The Birdie. And it would email you every day and say, "What did you buy?" And you would reply to the email with what you bought that day, and then it would track your expenses. Very analog, obviously isn't accurate, but a very simplistic approach to a difficult problem in the age of Mint and other apps that were coming up at the time. But it resonated with a lot of people. It especially resonated with people in countries that did not have access to bank accounts and things like that. So in some ways it was the mint.com for people in Bangladesh and stuff like that. And then it also resonated a lot with in particular, there was a grandmother who I wound up communicating with a lot because she's like, she has a bank account and stuff like that, but she liked the simplicity of it. The email came to her, she would reply to the email. It felt more conversational, and it felt more friendly. And I worked really hard with the branding. Um, I had actually bought the domain thebirdie.com because I was going to build a Twitter client, which the universe just did not need another freaking Twitter client. And so I owned the domain and I just started building this little app using the domain I already had. Anyway, um, but I ran with the name and people liked the name because it was very friendly and it kind of took the fear out of finances and stuff like that. All that to say, it was a heck of a learning experience for me because I I built a simple product. The whole point was for it to be simple and friendly. And then I found myself, because I was the sole everything for that project. Um, I wound up having conversations with a lot of very non-technical people, and because it was my project, I didn't there was it wasn't an option to be rude, it wasn't an option to be condescending, and it helped me really build this um, empathy muscle that I still work hard to maintain. And so um, after 15 years of practice now, I like to think that that muscle is pretty strong. But for most of the projects that I do, there's almost always that element of working with people who are non-technical. Like one of my main clients right now is an online magazine. So I'm dealing with a lot of writers who, some of them, they had never even seen WordPress before. I basically forced them onto the platform. So having good conversations, easy conversations, gentle conversations about tech. Um, and then I use a plugin for that project in particular. I use a plugin that takes over the WordPress dashboard and creates a knowledge base. And so I do a lot of documentation and a lot of video walkthroughs and stuff like that. Um, and then there was one other example. But anyway, so that's kind of how I handle it. I end up dealing with a lot of folks who aren't technical. Oh, and I also customize the projects that I build. So like when they sign into WordPress, they see about 4 things in the admin menu, whereas I of course see 40. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that, but mostly coming from a perspective of there's nothing wrong with this person not knowing the tech. How can I, guide them forward essentially?
Yeah. Um, so you mentioned, plugins and building plugins for WordPress. Walk me through your process when you're creating a plugin. Like, how do you start? How do you get to the end?
I am very much an MVP kind of developer, minimum viable product. That doesn't work for everybody. And so if I were to come work for you, um, that would play a big part in you knowing about how I work. I, coming from my background being when startups kind of became a buzzword, when building SaaS apps kind of had gained their first popularity in the early 2000s. Um, a lot of the thinking was around building something simple, getting it out there, trying to get your first customers or at least your first users to start using it to give you feedback. That's very much how I work. So a lot of when I submit work, it is not perfect. It's not meant to be perfect. Um, to me, it's an iterative process. And so talking about building a plugin, starting with the idea, what's the least amount of code and the fewest screens that I can produce and what not, often unstyled or whatever. Um, essentially to prove the use case, uh, and then keep iterating on it. So looking for a lot of feedback, a lot of early on, iterating towards the end. Now, uh, does any software project ever actually end? That's a good question. But at least getting to a point where it's, publicly releasable, looks good enough, functions well enough, is well tested, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think they even end when they technically die because there's always that one person out there that's like, I just really like this version. Um, what is it about WordPress in general that has been most exciting to you? Like, what do you love about WordPress?
A lot of it, honestly, is that community that we talked about earlier on. Um, excuse me. But I've also found that it's grown well. I am not a fan of the block editor. I know,
Those are
right?
danger words.
I know, and I'm being diplomatic here. Um, but the rest of WordPress, I think, is a phenomenal platform. In working on it for 15 years, I'm sure there have been scenarios where there's things that I couldn't code around, but I struggle to think of them. Um, it's just set up in a great way that you can almost always code around things that are built in, or obviously integrate with things that are built in to accomplish whatever you want. So I'm a big proponent of using it for just about everything, um, at least that humans are going to interact with. So I really like it. I'm yes, the code could be cleaner, and we don't need widgets anymore. But there's other than that, there's it's just a great platform that I've found that I can um, what bend to my will.
My big eek moment with WordPress is, back in like 2012-ish and the very early days of it, people would install and it wouldn't load or there'd be permission issues and they'd be like, "Oh, just put
Mhm.
it on 777 and we'll go." And I'm like, "Can we not though? There's got to be better ways." So, I haven't been on the back end of it in a long time, but hopefully that's not such a common occurrence anymore. But
That in yeah, about around then 2013 or so, I tried to help. A buddy of mine was the web guy for a church, and for a pretty big church in Nashville. So a big church in the scheme of big churches. And he said, "Oh, well, you know WordPress. Can you help me out?" And he was I want to say C++ or something, Java developer, right? Like PHP is for children kind of developer. Um, so he had added about, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 lines, not even to functions, like not even to the theme file, but to the index. Like he basically did all custom code right in the index. And so I said,
that's a
sorry, I
choice.
can't help you. Um, at least not for free. But yeah, I've actually come to I like that there is a WordPressy way to do things. And I've gained a lot of experience from, in particular, working with I worked at Alley, the big agency, for a while, and then after that worked at Monster, and working with these big teams was wonderfully eye-opening. Like I learned a lot and learned a lot of the like WordPressy way to develop things, which PHP purists complain about. And I understand where they're coming from, but it actually has taught me that like there is a Laravel way to do things. So there is a WordPress way to do things. There is a dot 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 way to do things. Um, and yeah, I've just gained a lot from that kind of experience.
Awesome. Do you have any tools or processes that you really enjoy going to when you're working with a distributed team? Everybody's remote now, so everybody has their favorite collaboration tools and project management tools. What do you love using?
Like most developers, I've never found a project management tool that I like. And I don't think I've ever been foolish enough to build. No, that's not true. I actually technically built one, but it wasn't really meant to be used for project management. One of my first big commercial WordPress plugins was a Kanban board. Um, and so a lot of project management happened, but that wasn't why I built it. But Slack, I basically live in Slack all day, every day, for with a number of different contexts. But that's my favorite way of communicating. I find it asynchronous enough. Um, and then what I think I like, well, for me, I tend to over communicate. I'm the opposite of the stereotypic type of developer who like disappears into their basement. No offense. Um,
None taken.
and and then a week later comes back. Like I said, I learned early to be very iterative, and so for me, it's a little bit of work and a lot of communication, and then a little bit of work and then a lot of communication. And those are the teams that I tend to work best with. And so then the tools just kind of get out of the way. Like Slack is great. You're chatting all day, every day. I think it lends itself to uh, easy and often communication. And then, tickets live where they live, Jira or Monday or pick one. They all, especially these days, they all kind of do the same thing, and they all have now added all of the same features, so they all kind of do the same thing. So it's just a matter of figuring out which one this team works with, and then coming up with the workflows that work for me.
What about like version control tools?
Um, Version control, meaning like Git
Yeah.
or so I mean, Allie taught me about doing really strict code reviews and stuff like that, which is great. For better or worse, a lot of the projects that I work on tend to be on the smaller side. So I use Git for absolutely everything, mostly to protect myself from myself, or to protect whatever team I'm on from me, and as they will do for, they will protect me from them and them from me. I'm getting circular here. Um, but uh but yeah, I at least for me, like, strong muscles in Git, it's an absolute necessity, usually used for deployment, in addition to code review and basically keeping code clean and tidy, and then being able to walk things back when you need to. Um, but I personally don't have a strict. I've worked within strict Git flows, not Git flow, but Git various flows within Git. Again, it just kind of depends on what the team's already got going.
Nice. Um, what are some of the steps that you would go through to optimize a WordPress site?
Starts with testing, um, wrapping my head around what's currently being used, and then obviously you can't fix a problem if you don't know what that problem is. So whether it's speed or a lot of what I've run into is pretty terrible themes. um, a lot of people reach for that $20 theme off of wherever, um, and then they want things customized, so then everything starts to break, and so that kind of optimization is tough. Um, Usually, I do an analysis of what plugins are installed, why they're installed, and is there any way of, like, how many can we combine or replace or remove often. Um, Nobody needs a WordPress site with 3 different form plugins. And the number of times I've seen a WordPress site with 3 different form plugins is a little shocking. Um, and then because of, at least in the last few sites that I've dealt with, tended to be larger. A lot of the optimization actually needs to happen on the server side, which is usually either talking to whoever is in charge of hosting, or working with somebody to optimize the server and the hosting side of things. Because WordPress, I mean, it can be very heavy. So there's also all that other stuff of, like, deferring lazy loading images and deferring scripts and blah blah blah. But um, I think you asked where you'd start. So yeah, I tend to look at what's closer to the metal to begin with.
What are the most amount of plugins that you've ever seen on a site?
Somewhere in the 70s, I think. And it's like, there's not, like, that's a, what do they call it? A superlative. Um, like, usually you don't need 70. Um, but like, and I, I check myself, like, right now, again, I run the large magazine site. It gets a lot of traffic. It's got somewhere in the 30s, I think, like, active plugins, which should upset me, but when I review them all, and, like, I trust the code that's behind them, because you could have 1,000 plugins that all run one line of code, and these days, PHP 8 and a good host company and good caching, like, it's not going to actually add a lot. So it really just depends on what functionality and whatnot. But yeah, usually if there's 70 plugins, you can usually find redundancy, or at least you can disable the snow effect when it's not Christmas time. Those kinds of things.
Right, right. Yeah, I had 107 one in support
Wow.
once. Yep, yep. And it was exactly what you said, like 3, 4 forum plugins and, 6 caching plugins that all conflicted with each other. Like, why is my page
Right.
not loading? Because it's at war.
Well, a lot of, like, I ran into this early on. I had it actually was one of the many things that drew me to starting to build WordPress plugins, and then WordPress plugin to try to sell WordPress plugins, was I had one client in particular who I built him this nice WordPress site. It was basically meant to be like a Yelp style. He did restaurant reviews, and he had other people writing restaurant reviews. And instead of, the value, right, was the reviews of restaurants and the content. This is why people would go to the website. But instead of working on more restaurant reviews or taking out ads or like actually optimizing the value of the site, I kept finding that he had gone into the plugin repo and just like installed this plugin or that plugin because they're all free. And the analogy I always uh, draw on is I'm like you're standing in the line at the bank, and so you're bored, and so you get on your phone and you're like, let me go to the app store and let me download whatever free apps, um, and just play with them, right? And with a phone, generally you don't have to uninstall them. There's no harm in leaving them there. And so I've run into that scenario a lot where people often, instead of, it feels like productive procrastination, but it's just procrastination. Like people should be working on the content or adding, if it's a WooCommerce site, they should be adding products, or they should be, writing more blog posts, or they should be like actually working on the business. But it's more fun to like go find the next cool plugin that is, because it's all in the plugin directory, at least it's all free, right? So, yeah, it's an easy trap to fall in. And, I've had to have that stern conversation with at least a few people of, it's your site. If you want to try to break it, go for it. But at least uninstall the stuff after you've tried it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what about, like, let's say you make an amazing app or plugin and you're so happy with it, and then you give it to the client and the client's like, no, I hate this. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. How do you work with them? Where do you go from there?
Like I say, I hopefully we didn't get there in the first place. And that's why another reason why I tend to work very iteratively. Lots of conversations, whatever work we can do up front. I also, again, coming from the early SaaS days, there's a lot of conversation around, excuse me, customer interviews, quantifying, the end user, before you build the thing. And so it applies to client situations or employee situations as well, where it's the like, are you sure you want this? Do you know you need this? That kind of thing. And so I can't think of a scenario in many, many years where we got to the point where I was handing something over and they went, oh, I hate this, because they had plenty of opportunities to figure out that they had hated it long before then.
You want to ask any questions, Misty? You're just quiet.
Sorry, my dogs keep barking, and that's why I'm staying on mute. But I'm good at this point. Sorry.
I'm glad you can't hear the snoring. I can't even see him. He's hidden over. I have one of three. The cute little one follows me around, and so he sleeps on the guest bed that's next to me. But for being this
Mine
big, he
often.
snores like a dog this big.
Mine are 100 pounds and they're usually super snory, so I locked them out so they would be quieter. Now they're just obnoxious outside the door. So I'm very
100%.
sorry.
You can
My
count
hound
on it.
dog's upstairs, so he's usually pretty quiet. But if he hears me down here, he'll get really sad and start doing the whoo. Mom, where are you? Um, some- uh, have you ever done like pair programming? Do you like working with a team, or do you prefer to focus on working by yourself?
That's a good question. I really like working with other people. I am also a little atypical developer. I'm an extrovert, um, and happier working with other people. Again, the conversation to me is more fun. Collaboration is more fun. So, from that perspective, yeah, I'm actually happier, which is, I mean, outside the context of this interview, like I am for the most part a solo freelancer. And so it actually gets not difficult, but sometimes I have a the good part is I have a nice network of colleagues, and so I tend to be chatting with them throughout the day anyway, so it kind of emulates that experience. But yeah, working together on something I find generally more fun.
Have you ever done pair programming before?
Technically, yes, but in like 2008 or something. Um, so nothing quite so structured.
Is that something that you think you would enjoy trying again, or?
Sure. I haven't heard about it in a really long time. Just doesn't generally come up in my kind of world. I tend to be, even the big companies, technically big companies that I worked at are small companies, and tend to be a bit more, um, independence, not the right word, but not corporate. And so for me, I have a cousin who's a Silicon Valley programmer, lives in San Francisco, works for like real, actual big companies, and so runs into that kind of thing a lot more. I honestly haven't heard that phrase in my ecosystem or my world in a very long time.
I think one of our stellar brands is trying to bring it back. So,
I mean, I don't dismiss any of it. Like I might have a good or bad experience, but all these things exist for a reason. It if it was a good idea and it caught on, it must have worked for somebody at some point. I mean, I was around in the first wave of agile when it was, capital A agile there, and that was its actual own process, and worked with big teams implementing some of the first uh, waves of agile processes of daily stand-ups when we all went into an actual office and actually stood up, and
mhm.
and all that kind of stuff, and it's interesting to see how a lot of those things, they work or they don't for different companies. I've been in many companies that have implemented a bunch of these different elements, and then some of it sticks around and works, and some companies still have the daily stand-up but none of the other processes. A lot of the companies and teams that I've worked with end up picking and choosing, which I think is the right approach, right? It's sort of lowercase a agile now, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Um, so pure programming, why not? The only real experience I had was two very giggly developers were working together in a very open room. And this was before noise canceling headphones really caught on. So externally, my experience wasn't awesome because mostly it was the two of them sitting there giggling and not getting a lot done. But again, I hold that against them, not the process.
That's fair. That's fair. Um, yeah, that's the last question that I have prepared here, I think. I don't want to just fill the whole time with questions. And do you feel you got a good practice here? Do you want me to add a couple more?
No, this is great.
Okay,
Certainly
perfect.
sufficient, because I think I'm honestly more interested in talking about the hiring stuff than um, you know doing the actual interview, but
Mm, yeah,
it's all fun.
absolutely. Um, I think that the interview was really strong, and I'm actually really glad that we did the interview before the resume feedback. Um,
Take
because
that, Misty. I'm just kidding. I'm
boom
obviously kidding.
in your face. I think that your resume doesn't necessarily give a good picture of the volume of
Mm.
experience and lived experience that you've had, and while it does reflect a bunch of projects, let me go ahead and are you okay with me let me see if your address, your numbers on it.
No, there's phone
um
numbers on there.
yeah, so I won't share it. We'll blur that out and maybe add it in editing later so that we don't share your personal information here.
We'll fix it in
um
post, as they say.
yeah, exactly, we'll fix it in post. But your resume, we don't have to do one page resumes anymore. You can do two. I wouldn't do more than like 2 or 3 pages, but really you want something that's easily glanceable, easily
Right.
like something that, if it gets ran through AI, it doesn't choke on any kind of formatting or anything. Um, the strengths that I have listed out here, it definitely demonstrates the diverse amount of experience that you have and the vast amount of experience that you have. You have a very comprehensive list of skills, you have a great variety of experience. So I really appreciate it about it. Do you want to add anything, Misty?
I know it's a little odd because you're not actually interviewing for a specific company. So when you have a chance to, you're going to be asked, do you have questions for us or what do you want to know about the company? And it's kind of a hard setup since we're not even pretending to be a specific company. But I definitely would be prepared for whatever reviews apps that you want or websites you want to use to dig in a little bit. But if you don't really have anything, because like you seem to work a lot with the people we worked a lot with. So if you really were interviewing at Stellar, you probably know a fair amount. So if you really don't have company questions, you might ask things about the process. What does the
Right.
process look like? What's the next steps? Who am I likely to speak to next? And that gives you a chance to dig into their LinkedIn and find out something about them. So you go in more comfortable and more prepared. And then we didn't ask them, but there's still lots of companies that ask you for your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And my favorite thing about talking to you today is you're very much focused on a user experience and
Mm.
communication and planning. And sadly, we see lots of developers that aren't. So
Right.
if I was elevator pitching your experience, it would be that strength that makes you stand out.
Thank you. Yeah, the I thankfully it's uh so I've also done hiring in the past and learned a lot from that experience um as well. The as f- the questions, so one of the biggest things that I had to focus on. I've always been a very confident person, but it's also easy in an interviewing process to be very demure, or you're there to just kind of say yes or to paint a picture for yourself. It took a long time for me to learn that. Um, Again, it's a confidence thing, and it's also like uh, you have to not desperately need the job to be able to feel comfortable to be in the position of you're also interviewing them. And so, anytime that I'm looking to work with a new company or even pick up a new client, because again, I'm primarily freelance these days, I'm often interviewing them and think of it that way. Like this is a conversation. We are deciding if we are working together. But it took me a long, long time to get there, right? Like it's very easy to you don't want to ask any questions unless you've Googled them on LinkedIn and are just trying to flatter them because like when I was in my 20s and early 30s, it was all about like, well, let me make sure I get the job. And I'd even been in interviews um, where where I was like, very early on, I was like, I do not want this job. And then I would still sit there and like work really hard at flattering them and not have any questions, da da da. Um, so it took me hiring other people to be like, oh, they're asking me really good questions. This is a good conversation. Um, and then also going on a couple of horrendous, oh, okay, you need to also do a spin-off podcast of like tell your worst story because
That's in the works. Don't worry. I've already pitched
good
that because
because
yeah, we have a lot.
I've got some doozies. I'll happy to be the first guest on that one too because
All
I've
right.
got some good ones. Um, but yeah, all of that to say, like I think there's I for me it was a process to learn this, but like approaching it as a like we are sincerely interviewing each other, and that has to be okay. I've also been in front of people interviewing who were appalled that I was putting hard questions to them.
No, I
And
love
so,
that.
but again, that kind of told me everything I needed to know of like, oh, so you're very corporate. You've gone through, just enough, training to interview people, but you expect it to go a certain way. This is not a good fit for me. And also being able to say in the middle of an interview, like, yeah, sorry, let's just stop. and again, that should be okay, but it's not normalized.
When I speak to students, I speak to a lot of colleges and a lot of high school kids, and I always emphasize that to them too. So that's why I was really excited when you said that. Like, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. If they're asking you illegal questions or they're making you uncomfortable, in a personal level, like if it's a discomfort about your experience or something, that's normal in an interview. But if you're uncomfortable because they asked you about something they shouldn't be asking you about, like, your family, your personal life, things that you don't have to share, then you excuse yourself. You don't want that
Hmm.
job. So it's okay to walk away and save yourself some time and heartbreak of, dealing with an unhappy work situation.
I
Well,
also think it's
and I've seen.
important.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also think it's important as a candidate to ask, why is this job open? Is it that we're
Hmm.
growing and bringing in new people? Is it because it's a horrible place to work, nobody will stay, and everybody's running
Hmm.
away? Or what does the career path look like once my foot would be in the door? What does success look like in 3, 6 months, 12 months? What's my career path? What's the typical progression of the
What's
career
the typical
from
work
this?
day?
Yeah. How flexible are you, and what is your culture, and what's important to you, and what's your
Hmm.
communication style? Because I worked for Satan's sister once. I don't ever want to work for a company like that again. And just like you said, I had terrible vibes going in. I sucked it up and did it anyway and stuck it out for a year. And I have lots of good stories about how not to run a business
Oh,
and
I
treat
bet.
people
I
from it,
bet.
but I really wish I hadn't went through it.
And I've even worked for, there was a company I worked for a few years ago that had the self-awareness. They we had an interview. I could smell the desperation, which was fine, because they offered me like twice the money, which of course is also a red flag, but I was like, I will hear them out. And then they kept insisting that I speak to one of their senior developers. And I was like, okay, fine. And so I met with him, and he was like, it's a shit show, and that's why we're going to offer you twice as much money. And but if you know that going in, you know and he said, and we're trying to make it better, and so we want to hire people like you. Nice little bit of flattery. But we're going to make it worth your time and effort. I was like, okay, like, thank you for being very honest. And so when I walked in and the squirrels were eating the insulation, I was like, okay, this is fine, like we're working towards something. um, and then when it wasn't any better, I don't remember how long I was there, a year and a half or something. Um, I said, okay, that's enough, and left and took the money and ran. But it was a nice bit of it was a shocking a bit of self-awareness. I have to be impressed.
There's something to be said for honesty on both sides. Like, I don't
Hmm.
care if you don't know the answer to every single thing that I
Right.
ask you, but if you lie to me or try to cover it up with like high level buzzwords and, repeating the same thing I just said back to me and saying my name a bunch of times, like, pass.
That's my favorite Nikki story is how often she interviews typically salespeople who every 14 seconds say her name. She loves that.
Yeah, yeah, it gets a
So
little
Misty,
bit
what I hear you
awkward.
saying, Misty, is Nikki's favorite thing is
Yes.
I
Nikki's
can't even
favorite thing is
imagine.
hearing the word Nikki.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
I've encountered those humans, but I can't. Uh, you want them to not be real. I'm sad to hear they are still real.
My favorite not favorite was one that kept getting my name wrong. They called me Nick over and over and over again, and I'm like, I don't go by Nick. You got to stop. And they're like, oh, I'm really sorry about that, Nick.
Hear me. Hear the words I'm saying.
Hmm. Yep. So to turn it back around and go back to the resume review,
Oh, sure.
yeah, some of the improvements, I mentioned the layout's a little bit muddy. I would clean up your
Is
work
it?
history and projects a little bit so that it flows better when you read it. Because right now it's kind of like you have your education and skills kind of in there, and then there's projects here and work history here, and it just flows a little bit weird. So I would look at that.
Okay, so for since we're not showing anybody, what I've got is like it had always been, even recently, it was reiterated to me that it should be one page and skimmable. Um,
Skimmable is
so
yes.
and so, but how do you, so I've got a resume with two columns. One is selected work history because I couldn't begin to fit every company, and frankly, I don't want to
Yeah,
admit half the companies that I worked for.
that's
Um,
fair.
but most of my job history is projects, either my own products or me freelancing. And so I've got so my left hand column are like real jobs that I've held, right? And then on the right are projects, products, things, other things that I've done. So I hear you. It doesn't all, so I could probably put more on the page, but under each one is a bullet list that just tries to highlight, what I got out of it or why that job makes me remarkable. Um, what would make that more skimmable? Like keywords up front or
Yeah, I
um,
would put the skills first.
okay.
And yeah, I would put those first, and then your employment history will flow right into your projects. So
Okay.
yeah.
Because I
Um,
mean, and I guess it's the interspersedness of like I've had jobs, then projects, and then jobs, and then projects, and so I struggle to, yeah, highlight all of that in a one timeline kind of way.
and you can read that in there. It's a little one will be some of your bullet points talk about, the technology that you use, some talk about successes that you've had, some talk
Mm.
about the duties that you had. So I would just align that a little bit more so they all read kind of the same.
Oh, got
The
it. Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then the other thing that was a little bit strange was your some of them have your title as a bullet point, and that just
Oh,
reads a
really?
little bit, yeah. So like under
That is weird.
Dart, you have CTO, lead developer, and project manager as a bullet point. It just reads a little weird. It kind of the flow's a little bit strange there.
Sure.
But I mean, and as you said, it really showcases that you just have a massive amount of experience, and trying to fit it into one page is just
And
not
that's the
it's not
struggle.
tenable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the other one that I have here is instead of telling us the company or project is, put that title there, and then talk about
Mm.
the achievements and stuff. And then the language that you use should be more, instead of generic phrases like maintained, put some active language in there, things that are measurable successes, like I increased the page load speed by 10%, or, after I redid their page, their conversion rate went up by, whatever percent, or, measurable things that you can put
Sure.
in there that will catch people's eyes. A lot of people
So
have AI reading things now too, so where they're looking for those specific little words or skills or
So what I'll say is if anybody listening to this and hoping to learn something is walk away with that stuff. Because a 30-year career, I couldn't tell you any of that information, right?
hmm
Because I mean, I worked there even if it was only 5 years ago, like most developers don't have access to those kind of analytics on even at a professional level. Like you could brag or make them up or um, I don't really mean it like that. You could infer
hmm
them. But so that's actually an interesting point is like anybody who's just starting out or still early on, like try to walk away from a job with if that's important, then try to walk away with those actual data points rather than what I did, which was like I sat at a desk every day and got the job done, but I couldn't tell you, how many millions I made them or whatever. Or I'm not
Yeah.
supposed
And
to.
that's very fair and I think very common. And so what you might do is try not to cover 30 years. So in your skills area, you're putting the things that you know really well. The things that aren't of interest in where you're trying to take your career, you might let drop off. So you probably don't need to go quite as far back in your employment history. That'll free up some space. And then the things that you are really proud of or exceptionally skilled in, go at the top of your skills section so that they really stand out as the thing that makes you different from the crowd. I'll give you an example. We posted a ad, and because it's one click, easy apply through so many websites, it is not unusual to have 700 or 800 in a day.
Right.
And that is why AI is screening so many of them, and it's difficult. And that is why, to help you stand out from the crowd, to be able to say I had this measurable improvement might make you stand out. But it's a fair statement that we don't always know what that measurement is.
Yeah. Yeah. The resume to me, like I've always been a good interview. Um, I was chatting with a buddy this morning, and he's like, I get it. Like you were never not qualified. And I was like, no, I was often not qualified, but I never wasn't going to get the job from for the sake of a conversation, unless like once in a while I had a pretty terrible interviewers. Um, but I'm a good conversationalist. Generally, I can figure out how to relate to people, all that kind of stuff. The hard part that I've never been able to figure, like, and also the Joker in me, like, I want my resume to be like one big, like, just interview me and you'll find out how awesome I am kind of thing. Because yeah, the resume part never felt any sort of representational. And like you said, like there's how do you convey a broad depth or broad broad depth, uh, a broad history, a deep depth, I have a ton of experience. I can figure out the day-to-day stuff. Like it's incidental, you know. Um, but the working with people, working well with people, um, higher and lower, more experience, less experience, how you convey that, how you convey a sense of humor. Um, at one point, I did have a resume that was like not jokey, but it was like inappropriately creative. Um,
Mhm.
but I almost
Yeah,
think
that
that
will.
helped me because at least I stood out. Now I think that would actually be maybe trickier. Like you'd have to be careful with words because AI is not going to interpret a design well. Um, so anyway, it's, maybe
And
the
that
landscape's
actually
changing.
throws me to some feedback on the portfolio side of things, because I also did click through your portfolio.
Yeah.
Um, and you could do some of it on your resume with just a summary paragraph at the top
Mm.
and talk, I have 30 years of experience. Obviously, I couldn't fit it all in here. I put some highlights and talk about some, throw in some keywords there for the AI to pick up that will still give us a look at your personality. Um, the
Do you think now, at least the way you guys are processing resumes, should that be on the resume? Because usually for me, that was always either in a needless cover letter, but a often necessary, or just the email. I'm emailing somebody saying, hey, I'm applying for this job. Here, in my 30 years, blah, 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 resume attached.
We don't require cover letters for most of our jobs unless it's actually like a writing or like a lot of a marketing, we ask for them. But people hate cover letters now, and honestly, most of
Agreed.
them don't get read. If I look at a resume and there's something that I have questions about, like a gap or,
Hmm.
change in career or something, then I might go, oh, I wish I could like take a look at a cover letter. But for the most part, I don't read them until last. Um,
And I guess that's why I'm asking. It's like, could or should that information? Because again, for me, I mean, because I have always found it uh, a, an annoying exercise. My cover letters tended to be very short, but I also have the benefit of being a developer, often working for small teams. I'm not in corporate America so I need a 4 paragraph cover letter intro or whatever. But anyway, my point is that I would use that it was an opportunity for me to write more language, right? And write
Mhm.
sentences and paragraphs. And so there I could often convey, again, humanity, experience, humor. And so I'm wondering if that isn't now like if my resume's going to be thrown in a pile of 800 and processed by AI in order for it maybe without a human looking at it initially, is there a benefit to me putting those kinds of sentences at the top of a resume now
I'd say
where,
yes still.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't use AI to look. I read every resume that comes across my desk because I don't want to
I'm
miss
so
those
sorry.
nuances. Yeah, I know. I'm getting to a point where I can't really do that anymore. But the point that I was going to make there is that even if I did use AI to screen over it first, then I'm going to read through all the resumes that have the skills highlighted that I'm looking for. Then
There
I'm
you
going
go.
to
Yeah.
read through everything as a person, and I still get to see that personality. The thing that you have to be careful about is, you have the benefit of being well known in the community. So a lot of people know your personality and would read that and,
Right.
but as a lot of HR professionals aren't in the WordPress community. They're not in the
Hmm.
tech world or whatever. So they don't know who you are or what your personality is like. And a lot of times humor, creativity can come across as, you know, being
Unprofessional.
unprofessional or condescending or,
Mm.
there's a word that I'm looking for and I can't think of it now, of course. But, basically, you don't want to come across as, this guy thinks he's better than everybody else, and, after having had a conversation with you, I can absolutely see the personality in it, but initially reading through your portfolio, you have that Yorkshire tea comment on there, and I was like, "Oh, is this guy a little extra? Is he gonna be a little bit, drama to manage?" Like, so you have to know that while putting your personality in there can backfire too.
And honestly, at this point in my career, it's on purpose. If you're not gonna like my dad jokes, we can't work together. And
Well,
so
that was a plus for me, but
there's it was also a lesson learned from like again startup landing pages, marketing pages, right? Is you want to both quantify or qualify and then also disqualify. And so for me, again, it's a desperate attempt to put any sort of personality, but also, because I've worked with or I've been interviewed by or met with potential clients where I'm like, they're humorless. They just want me to grind 16 hours a day. They, and I have to work, I have to want to work with you too. That's a big
Mhm.
part of that interviewing back kind of process. And obviously an interviewer isn't always indicative of the team or the people you're going to work with. But you take the cues where you can get them.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And you have the luxury of having the ability to be picky in that way. But
Yeah,
I did want to mention it for folks that are watching that might not
for
be
sure.
in a place in their career where they can have that freedom and
They
choosing
can
this
mess around. Yeah.
yet. Yet. Yeah. Um,
But I agree that it's a great idea to have a professional summary at the top for the person reading it after AI screens it for your skills list. And it is an opportunity to, if you know what company you're applying to, so you kind of have an opportunity in your research to kind of see where they are as an organization. Are they do they seem to be very corporate and stuffy? And you might take an opportunity to scale that message to who is most likely to read it. But I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, as a professional with decades of experience, I have yet to find the challenge that I wasn't willing or able to step up to.
There's
um,
one of the things that I struggled with a lot, I've alluded to here, and then have passed along, like also talking to students, new people in the industry and whatnot, is desperation is a hard thing um, early on, and fear in general, right? Like not always having the privilege of not needing a job, um, and how much that can play into this whole process, right? Like how you convey yourself. You're sitting there going, like I went early on in my career, I lived in New York City, very expensive place. Um, Wanting to have a life and go out and whatnot, just leaving the apartment cost money. And then, needing back, especially back then, needing tech, needing a computer, needing a phone, needing all these things, um, played a big part in how I conveyed myself, represented myself, both in what I was writing, my resume, cover letters, whatnot, trying to be very formal and whatnot. Um, and then in interviews and stuff like that too, right? Like being afraid, like I'm still not a good negotiator. Like that still scares me. Just I've never had good practice, and then talking about money, um, and so I can kind of muddle through it now, but like that stuff is hard, and so important in this process. And a lot of us get no training, and for better and depending on your trajectory, you're only doing it every couple of years, maybe. Um, so
And
it's tough.
that brings up good points too. So if you've had killer rounds of interviews and you get that job offer, it's okay to ask whoever extends that job offer to you, is this negotiable at all? I'll take a look at it and I will get back to you with a response. And you can ask them, what is the turnaround that you expect from me for a response? Because a lot of times, if you're interviewing one place, you're interviewing several places, you might be expecting more than one offer, and you might hope for some days that you can wait for those to come in to compare. And keeping in mind, sometimes that where you're negotiating isn't always your base pay. It might be a sign-on bonus, it might be more vacation time. People sometimes try to negotiate things you can't negotiate. Like,
Like
oh, I'm going to need
title.
a different, well, title, but a different health plan. I can't give you a different health plan. We
Right.
only offer one. It's audited under 5,500. I can't make it an exception for you. So I can't negotiate, and they don't understand that. Or I want something different in a 401k. The IRS controls that. My plan document is in. I can't give you anything different with that. So I don't know how people necessarily know what can and cannot be negotiated, but usually dollars, PTO time, yes, benefits package, not usually, particularly with a larger company. But I it's a struggle. It's a struggle, particularly because in tech, we work with people that might struggle with communication in general. We're not always really comfortable in our emotional intelligence. We don't always pick up on communication cues. So being prepared to say, is this offer negotiable? How much time do I have to consider it? Lets you step back, let the anxiety go down, take a hard look at it, compare your options, and then get back to them when you're a little more comfortable. And it's a struggle.
Yeah, it's scary.
It is.
Uh, Real quick, the other feedback that I had here on your portfolio is some of your links don't take you to the relevant part of the page. You just click it and it reloads the page.
Oh,
So if I'm looking at somebody who's developing WordPress pages, I want that link to take me to where I'm looking at.
makes
Um,
sense. To be
and
fair, or just for the context, the portfolio site got built in about 45 minutes. Um, so that's another good bit of feedback, not only to me, what you just said, obviously, but to anybody listening is, um, yes, bang this stuff out because you have a phone call in an hour. And so you've got to have something to show. But then go revisit it and have your friends and colleagues go click on everything. So they'll let you know when something doesn't load correctly.
I'm also okay if you just provide me with a couple links to things that you've worked on and say
Right.
I'm revamping my portfolio site and I'll get you a link by X date or whatever as well. So, um, knowing that you
Yeah,
put it up pretty quickly, I'll just go real quick through the couple other
and I'm
notes
not
that I
making an
had.
excuse. It's more the like, this is this happens. You know what I mean? Like my site for years has been, because I don't ever get work through my website. And
Mhm.
had not until, again, just a couple months ago, had not ever thought of it as a portfolio, because work comes to me through either me applying and then a conversation, or usually word of mouth or what have you. So it was like, oh, and so my website was always like, it was creative, it was interesting, it was meant to be a little like experimental because that's my background. Um, and then it was like, oh no, this needs to be bland and straightforward and have a big picture of me smiling at the top. Like, what
No,
am I
please don't put
doing?
it, no, don't put that on there. We don't want your pictures. I mean, it's on everybody's resumes and stuff now, but I don't want to see a picture of what you look like, because that's going to give us that's going to put us in that place of unconscious bias land where, you can look at somebody and infer things about them just based off of their appearance or in
Well, but
that's
that works in my favor, right? Like me smiling and looking charming, endears me to you.
it
I'm
can, but
sure
it's
it
also going to
absolutely does.
tell us things that we can't judge you on, like race
Sure,
or potentially religion
sure.
or, yeah. Sorry, Misty.
I was just gonna say, probably as a freelancer looking for jobs in the community, you're right. Looking friendly and engaging and happy probably gets you more clients reaching
Hmm.
out to you. It's a little trickier in a job interview
100%.
where
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that.
Yep. For those that might stumble across your portfolio, and click through it, the other things that I have here are, some of them are just an icon of the places that you work that take you to their web page, but it doesn't. I mean, I don't know if you worked on their web page, just a
Right.
landing page, the page as a whole. So
That's
just a
on
little.
purpose.
Okay. Um,
But
if
I
you're
hear you.
doing a portfolio for a company, though, put a little info
100%.
about that. Um, and then for the apps and games and plugins that you've built section, no hiring manager is going to go try to find it, download it, and look at your code or whatever. So just put a little, idea about what you did and what you
Hmm.
used to make it or whatever. For
Yeah.
for people that are making traditional portfolios that might see yours, those are the things that I would suggest
No,
you do.
absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yep. And I mean, and what I'm taking away from this, like, I'm not trying to argue with you.
Mhm.
The, the, yeah, the difference is intent. And I think that definitely people should have more of exactly what you're describing.
and you should argue with us. And at the end of the day, it should be the perfect reflection of you. And
Well, it's
if we're sticking the muds and we don't appreciate it, you don't want us anyway.
Well, and that's why, like, this is a fun conversation, right? Because it's all experiential. I mean,
Mhm.
my experiences, one, are now dated. So, I mean, my stories are going to um, amuse and delight, or probably more likely amuse and horrify anybody listening. But I also am hoping that most of the practices or things that made them good stories 20 years ago are outdated and or aren't you're less likely to see them now. I hope, you know what I mean. um, but this is what's tough with exactly this whole topic is um, different career paths, different trajectories, different experiences. They're going to color your overall where you end up.
And just
And not every
generational differences too. Every generation has different focuses and
Exactly.
different importance and different lived experiences. So, sorry, Misty.
and
Interviewing.
it and as we've
Yeah.
talked to before, not everybody's a good fit for every company, and it's way more important to be true to yourself.
And unless you desperately need the job, and that's where it gets tricky and scary. And because I've worked for places where I never should have said yes in the first place, but I needed the job, and so then what do you do? whole different
Yep.
whole
And
different
we've
Taking
ballgame.
taking
briefly
that
talked
experience.
sorry, we've briefly talked about AI, and it is kind of scary in tech right now between definitely your product doesn't end up being as good if you're an organization using AI to write your marketing, or it's never as good as a person yet. But how many companies are there? Nothing beats quality like a low price right now, and the job market is kind of scary right now. So absolutely, your comments and observations about being desperate definitely change things right now.
Yeah.
But every desperate position that you wind up taking is also more experience to take you to the next one. So if you do find yourself in a job where you're miserable and you don't like the leadership or you don't like the work environment, then you take that experience and you learn, what to look for in the next job. You take that experience and grow your portfolio and just look at it as a learning opportunity and a stepping stone to get you through to the next thing. Just because you
What
accepted a job, you don't have to stop looking for your next one.
Right, that's what not to do. The I was also lucky where I for a long time I was in tech where tech was booming, and in tech, maybe this has changed, but again for much of my career it was never a detriment to jump jobs every 6 months, right? Versus like I've known plenty of people in education or whatnot where like it's a huge red flag if you don't stick something out for 2 years. And so that's, I think, I can't fathom that, but that's the way I'm wired. Like I have definitely taken jobs and never stopped looking. I think the shortest I was ever in was 3 months, but I've known people who have, will stick with a job for a week or two and then piece out to something else because they just needed one paycheck to get through to the next job, which is I
Don't put
think
them on your
will
resume.
well, that's it, right? And you do have to be you have to be careful about reputation, right? Like if you're depending on what circle you're in or what ecosystem you're in or what have you, but um a small town, that kind of thing, you've got to be a little careful, but um
Some people are also red flagging now people who have been in a company for a very long time because of stagnation and,
well,
not learning new processes. A lot of times when people stay in a role, they're not growing and learning. So that's now another scary thing that you've stayed too long. So, and that changes every day. It changes what people are looking for and what they want based off of current trends, but also, what Misty is looking for is not going to be the same as what I'm looking for because she's kind of like a really old Generation X mindset. And while I am an Xer also,
you're not allowed to say that anymore.
I'm more of a millennial mindset, And we're not allowed to say old
Well,
Gen X.
not if we were interviewing, but
I'm
truth is truth.
Well, I can
I'm
tell
just
you
teasing.
how old I am as an interviewer. Yeah, just don't tell me how old you are.
Oh, I'm telling you, lady.
Do you have any questions for us or anything before we wrap up?
No, but I just a comment that I think this is great. Like there has always needed to be more transparency around hiring, um, all the kind of stuff that we've touched on and a thousand other things. But because it is a scary process, an intimidating process, a process that does not have a lot of transparency. Um, there are resources out there for getting help, but they're not always known to us. Like I had breakfast this morning with a buddy of mine, and he's got um, one child in college and one child about to graduate high school, and so we're talking about them going out into the workforce or interviewing for opportunities that aren't necessarily jobs and whatnot, and how do you get more experience and how do you think on your feet and how do you handle these various situations that come up. And there's thankfully there's so much more knowledge and information and insight and talking and thinking about like appropriateness, and like you brought up, rules and regulations and stuff like that. But I would also say like there's a lot of the times it's what I've struggled with is it's not nearly so nefarious or black and white or even a legal sort of thing, but just these little subtleties of a human talking to a human and trying to figure out how to negotiate a situation of just, again, like if I'm sitting here nervous because I need the job, that's going to affect my behavior and how I represent myself in a conversation, right? Um, and so the more experience we can have, the more um, contact we can have with other people in that kind of context or hear from experience is all of it relevant, some of it entertaining, but I love that you're approaching this topic.
I appreciate your observation about experience too. Even in the examples that we gave, where maybe the interview is not going well, it's not a place you don't want to be. If you suffer through it, chances are you will still take away some tools, some the questions that they answer that maybe you want to look up later. There's lots of good content. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming because there's so much, but if I'm asked this type of a question in an interview, what is it that they're looking for? What does this question mean? And if you're gathering that information, it just makes you better and stronger for your next interview, and then you won't be as nervous because you'll be better prepared, or you came through the meat grinder and you survived and you lived the next day, and you didn't just stroke out because somebody was abrupt and rude or asking illegal questions or whatever the situation is. So
Yeah.
experience does make us better.
And 20 years later, you know what to do and not to do when you're the one hiring, which was beneficial for me.
That's true.
Well, I appreciate very much your, working through our first episode with us and being willing to put yourself out there to, help other people too. So thank you so much. It's been a lot
My
of fun
pleasure.
talking to you. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for being our first. We greatly appreciate it.
And then I don't know, maybe we can add a link in post or whatever, but if anybody is watching this and wants to participate, please go to the post status page and find the Get Hired link and sign up, because we would love to talk to anybody who's looking for a job. It doesn't have to be a WordPress job. It can be anything inside or outside of tech. We'd really like to help people get on their feet and get out there. So um, please don't be scared to apply.
Thank you.
The Get Hired podcast is a post status production in partnership with Liquid Web, sponsored by Omnisend.